All right, the World Health Organization continues to push to finalize a worldwide pandemic treaty. It's a global power grab. Now, last weekend, WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus called the treaty, quote, mission critical for humanity. No hyperbole there. And he attacked its critics, I guess like Washington Watch, for spreading fake news, lies, and conspiracy theories. Well, earlier today, Congressman Chris Smith spearheaded a press conference to highlight the many, and I emphasize many, concerns surrounding the proposed treaty. Let's just say the lack of transparency, the backroom negotiations, which, by the way, they're meeting even this week. And almost all of it is behind closed doors, no access by the public. There's the WHO overreach, the infringement on U.S. sovereignty, the unknown financial obligations for U.S. taxpayers, threats to intellectual property rights and free speech, funding for abortion. Yeah, it's in there too. The list goes on. Well, join me now to discuss this and much more, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. He is a senior member on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. He's also the co-chair of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus. He represents the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey. Congressman Smith, welcome back to Washington Watch. Great to see you in studio.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your leadership. And again, your contribution to today's press conference on WHO was outstanding. Thank you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate you taking this on. There's so many issues, and every issue that is going to be advanced has to have a champion, and you're a champion on this because you have institutional knowledge and history. You know what the WHO is about. And today in your comments, as you laid the groundwork for the press conference, right out of the gate, you talked about their pro-abortion record and what is in this treaty that will target innocent human life. Talk about it.
They embedded into the treaty language that talks about continuing essential health services. Now, that sounds benign, who would argue with that? Then you look into WHO pronouncements, and these are all on their website, and I have copies of every one of them, and they define essential health services to be abortion, on demand. They are pushing now, as model legislation for the world, abortion right up into the moment of birth, all 9 months, no gestational limits, and for any reason.
What does that have to do with the pandemic?
That's exactly my point. Why did they embed that into a treaty with regards to infectious disease, unless somehow you construe an unborn child to be the equivalent of a disease or an illness or a wart or something to be excised. And they do. That's how they look at it. In their model legislation, Tony, they say that there's no right to conscience on the part of healthcare professionals. They have to be coerced into do it or lose their license. They say no waiting periods, no parental involvement, and again, abortion right till birth.
So you can suspend the freedom of speech because in this treaty, it's a treaty. Now, they call it an agreement, a draft agreement, a protocol.
And it's binding.
But it's binding.
Absolutely binding.
It's binding. So it's a treaty. They're doing that to avoid going to the United States Senate for ratification, calling it just an agreement. But in the body of it, they want member states to crack down on freedom of speech if anyone challenges what they're doing. So abortion, yes, keep the doors open. Free speech, shut it. Churches, shut those down. Anything that would challenge their authority.
Well, I've read it very carefully. I've read every iteration, and now the one that's moving.
And they keep changing it.
They do change it, but they haven't changed that.
Right. I know, but they keep, because they'll change something and say, well, that we
fixed that, right? And they haven't. But they are talking about combating misunderstandings, misinformation. As I pointed out at the press conference, well, that ought to be retroactive because the World Health Organization, just like our own government, put out such false and misleading information about COVID, starting from the very beginning. Now, Tedros, the Director General of the WHO, got his job from Xi Jinping in China. He was their candidate. They backed him. They lobbied for him. And when COVID hit, he did everything he could to provide disinformation about how it spreads, as well as the origins of it. And we still don't have from WHO a clear and definitive word as to where it came from because he was doing the Chinese Communist Party's bidding.
And the world suffered because of that.
Big time.
Because you remember, it's not spread human to human.
That's right.
We heard that, it's under control. when in fact it was not.
And the criticism of Trump when he said we need to ban flights coming from there.
Right.
I mean, it was like, well, that should have been WHO because their man was on the job, but it really wasn't. And they also looked the other way when certain doctors inside of China, Dr. Lee was one of them, were harassed and belittled by the dictatorship, and there's WHO going along with it.
So when we look back and do an assessment of how WHO, and I would, as you pointed out, I would throw in our government as well.
Yes. When
we look at how they did, why would we give them this authority in cement to do the same thing again?
That's why we have to. They even talk about they're promoting the progressive realization of universal health coverage. So that's in here too.
Right. What's that have to do with the pandemic?
Exactly. Everything they do here is a grab, and then the power inures to themselves. It's not like people in my district will have a say. They will be told, this is what you must do. And when you get into some of the controversial stuff, like vaccinations for 2-year-olds, it's unclear how serious they're going to be able to impose.
So this
things
is,
like
instead of moving these decisions closer to the people, it's moving them away from the people. All right, Congressman Chris Smith, my guest, who hosted a press conference with a number of experts today on Capitol Hill talking about this pandemic accord agreement. It's a treaty. It is a treaty. If it, like they say, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This is a treaty. But they're skirting the obligations of having a treaty presented to the United States Senate because they know they couldn't get the support for this.
Well, and they may do it. So-called executive agreements is a handy little device that's being used, has been used by the Obama administration. It's being and Biden. It was used for the Paris Accords on climate change. Submitted to the.
It was used on the Iran
nuclear deal, and that's why Trump completely abrogated that false agreement or treaty because it was not properly ratified. And that's what we're seeing again here. And it's just the skirting of getting the consent of the Senate, as difficult as it is, ensures that a very robust discussion takes place. Exactly. Our founders were so right to do it.
They knew what they were doing. All right, I want to go to this issue of basically disinformation that they talk about, which would silence critics. And even, this is not just people who are out there talking. This is like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's on our program often, who is a medical expert, understands pandemics. They want to silence these people.
And they will, if they're giving the ability to do that. They'll do it by ostracizing them. They'll use it by taking away their medical practice, the ability to practice their medicine. There's all these tools that would be at their disposal. And, there was just within a few days, the Judiciary Committee wanted to depose a guy named Flaherty, who was in charge of the digital for Biden. And he was admonishing, demanding that Meta and others, get this out, take this off social media, because there was a dissident voice saying, wait a minute, time out. That mask, that's not the way to go. That vaccination of 2-year-olds isn't the way to go, just like you just said.
And that's a part
and that's in this treaty.
It's right. It's in black and white, so this is not speculation. I'm going to quote from this. The draft agreement dives into this issue of censorship, and it has this kind of Orwellian concept of infodemic. There's too much information. So infodemic means too much information, false or misleading information. I'm quoting from it. In digital or physical environments during disease outbreaks, it causes confusion and risk-taking behaviors that can harm health. It also leads to mistrust in health authorities and undermines public health and social measures. So they called in upon governments that are a part of this agreement to clamp down and do exactly what the Biden administration, as you just described, did during the pandemic, which has now resulted in a Supreme Court case. The state of Missouri and Louisiana have taken the Biden administration all the way to the Supreme Court. It's going to be a major First Amendment case because they now have all the evidence of what you just described. That's all a part of the depositions that came out.
Well, I'm so glad those attorneys general have taken that action. it's Article 18 in the treaty. It says it wants to combat false, misleading, misinformation, or disinformation, as you just said. And I would ask, well, let's make that retroactive.
You're right.
The World Health Organization itself engaged in massive disinformation right from the very beginning under Tedros. And remember, I've known him for 30 years. He used to be the health minister for Ethiopia and did not do a credible job there until China picked him up and made him their candidate for WHO. And so let's look at that. And China has had such an impact on the WHO. They practically, I wouldn't say run it completely, but have a malign influence, especially with the man they put there in charge.
So with almost everything the WHO was wrong on.
Yes.
And the lemmings in our government did the same. They were wrong, too, because they followed.
I noticed at the press conference you called them lemmings. That was great. I meant to say
they followed this. They followed
right over the cliff.
And it was all these so-called experts.
Yes.
But there's no introspection, looking back at what they did and modifying. They're just saying, all right, they're doubling down, saying, we know you people know you're on to us. We know that you know.
Yeah.
And so we're going to submit this into a treaty, and you won't have a voice.
There's no lessons learned from COVID-19 when it comes to coercing people, using the coercive power of the state. I mean, to ridicule, ostracize,
right.
And then make them, who gets the grants? The people who say the NIH and CDC, we go along with whatever you say.
Have you heard?
And then they conform.
Any acknowledgments that they were wrong on the mask?
No.
The studies are now out.
How many times we have different
right. And they're now breaking them back out.
I know.
What about the vaccines?
I know.
But they actually want to indemnify even further.
It's right in there. Exactly.
In this treaty.
Right.
Those that would pursue these vaccines.
We do have a vaccine court here.
Right.
It is designed for the public interest so that pharmaceutical companies don't get sued. Sometimes I think it goes far too far.
Right.
When somebody
but
gets
this takes
sick.
it further.
This takes it further. And someone who could be disfigured, die, a crippling
recourse.
No recourse.
All right, Chris Smith, we're up against a break, but we're going to come back and finish talking about this. So text the word WHO to 67742, sign the petition. Also call your member of Congress and tell them we got to get out of this organization. We got to stop this pandemic accord, and we got to get rid of this corrupt organization, which Congressman Chris Smith, it's morally corrupt too.
Exactly. Republicans in the House and Mario Diaz-Balart, the chairman of the Appropriations Foreign Ops chairman, in his bill, it's passed the House, defunds WHO completely. We don't think the Senate will accept it, so we're in a major clash with them on this. But our president, Biden, not only gives them about $115 million at its so-called assessment, he gives them another $500+ million in $500 million voluntary contributions. And what are they doing? They have now become the major purveyor of abortion till birth on the planet. And they're entering into these cooperative agreements with all these groups like Planned Parenthood, IPPF out of London, the major group. The Center for Reproductive Rights is now being considered. And thank you, because you were one of those major signers of a letter to Tedros and the executive board not to enter into that cooperative agreement. One of them was with the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. Here's a group that's going all over the world with WHO print and promoter on them saying, we want you to change your law and legalize abortion till birth and have the government pay for it. So WHO is like the major catalyst for doing this. Why is a baby being killed as if he or she was a disease or a disability?
Now, you don't have to agree with these comments, but I'm going to speak to this just from a standpoint. And I'm not saying you don't agree with them, and I'm saying you don't have to. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. When I look at it, this is a massive grab of power. It is laying out the red carpet for global governance. And in my comments today, I equated this to the Tower of Babel, which was man's effort to centralize government. And look what God did. He separated them. He confused the language and dispersed them as he had told them previously to do. Look, God's form of government is decentralized. This is seeking to create one world government. And of course, we see from Scripture where that ends. And we see that in the last book of the Bible in Revelation. Now, some say, well, that's inevitable. It's going to happen. All right, doesn't have to happen on our watch. We know God's plan. We know what God's purposes are. We know what God's principles are. And as long as we're here, we should advocate for those. And that is, number one, all life is sacred. It is created in His image, therefore it should be protected. Decentralized government, we should not surrender our authority to the United Nations or any other entity. And we should not trample upon our First Amendment freedom of speech and religion, the right to assemble. And that's exactly what this treaty, this pandemic accord, would do. So text the word WHO to 67742.